comes in and basically starts the dumbest trade war in the history of this country. This is going to be about potentially millions of people losing their jobs. It's going to be about millions of people losing their savings, many of people losing their retirement security, and at the same time taking on even higher costs for everything they buy. So that's going to push us in potentially to foreclosures or people being pushed out of their apartments. You know, I remember this from 2008 and how long it took us to dig our way out. And to this day, there are families, there are communities that still haven't recovered. Recessions can be all those fancy charts and graphs, but at the end of the day, people feel them one person at a time, and they can be devastating.
Several months later.
Listen to this, 147,000 jobs on non-farm. That is well above the estimates of 110,000. The unemployment rate went down to 4.1%. The expectation was it was going to tick up to 4.3%.
You expected some of this, but this is better than expected?
Yeah, Sarah, it is. Look, this jobs market is like the Energizer Bunny. Every single time we expect it to run out of steam, it just keeps going and going. So these new numbers show that the U.S. economy added 147,000 jobs in June. That was well ahead of the expectation of about 118,000, well ahead of some whispers that we heard on Wall Street of a sub 100,000 number. So this is indeed beating expectations. We were also expecting a slowdown. We did not get that. This is basically in line with May, which was revised higher. It's also good news. The unemployment rate was expected to go up. It didn't. It went down to 4.1%. That is a very healthy number. This is still relatively historically low. And again, it's below the 4.3% that we had expected. When we look at the trend in the jobs market, you can see that things have slowed down from last year, but not in an alarming fashion, right? We did expect to have weaker numbers here in the last few months. And so really things are holding up a lot better than feared. The unemployment rate, again, it's nowhere near where it was a few years ago. It does remain, look at this, the unemployment rate, it's still hovering at very low levels.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to talk about another bombshell jobs report that has the liberal media stunned because they thought that the economy was going to collapse due to President Trump's policies when it comes to tariffs. But none of the things that they predicted have happened yet, right? We have not seen empty shelves. We haven't seen hyperinflation. Employment is still good in this country. And we have a new jobs report that basically backs up this fact that the economy is not headed towards doom and gloom, again, which is what was predicted just a few months ago, right? Today's jobs report beat for the fourth month in a row. Okay, non-farm payrolls up 147,000, beating 78 of 79 survey economists. Unemployment down to 4.1% from 4.2%. Native-born employment, that means people who were born here getting jobs, up 2,079,000 since January. Foreign-born, aka people born in other countries working jobs here in America, down 543,000. Yeah, that's exactly what I voted for, right? I voted for more Americans to have jobs and less foreign people in our country with jobs, okay? For the same months last year, foreign-born workers accounted for 48% of new jobs. Yeah, so this is a complete and total reversal from what we've seen with the Biden administration, in which under Biden, all of the new jobs were basically going to foreigners, right? Going to illegals, okay? But now that we have a new president, things have changed. Okay. Also, on top of that, the federal employment fell 7,000 in June and is now down 69,000 this year. Right. So again, less government bloat jobs. Right. More real jobs. For example, not only did job growth exceed expectations in June, but all of that net job growth was full-time work, which rose 437K as the number of part-time jobs fell 367K. Okay, so again, we're talking about good quality jobs being created here, not part-time jobs, but actual full-time employment going to Americans, native-born workers. And that is, again, what I voted for, right? And let's just say that CNN, the mainstream level media, they're not handling this jobs report too well. Because again, these are the same people that predicted doom and gloom because of tariffs, right? But yet we still have not seen any of the things that these people predicted. Take a look.
Again, since, March and before, there were predictions that the tariffs, and granted, a lot of them have been pulled back, most of them have been pulled back, but all that tariff policy was going to lead perhaps to inflation, would lead to job losses, predictions of doom. That doom just hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened. And, John, I've been doing a lot of reporting on this topic. And what I'm hearing is that for the last few years, really since COVID, but even before, companies have realized that their supply chains can be interrupted for lots of reasons, for a virus, for a geopolitical event, for a war, for a climate event. And so they've been using technology to really streamline things. They've been getting their systems in place, and there's just a lot more efficiency in the system now. In some ways, I think this is a triumph of business and how business has been optimizing. Now, that said, when we think about who's going to do well in this period, it's going to be big businesses. I am hearing that there's more pressure on small and mid-sized businesses that will be far less able to cope with whatever tariff inflationary impact we do see. That concerns me because small and mid-sized businesses are what fuels a lot of communities around the country. If you see them going under because they can't take even a little bit of tariff pressure, that could have a jobs impact. So again, optimistic right now, but it's, there are some issues on the horizon still.
All right, but a good jobs report, one more good jobs report.
Yeah.
We've really seen a long run. We're talking years long run here of this at this point.
It has been a resilient first half of the year for the U.S. jobs market, despite all the questions about tariffs and everything else. Let's just start with the numbers. Walk us through this jobs report.
I think resilient is the word. 147,000 jobs added. That's right in line with the average for the past year, about 146,000. That jobless rate fell a little bit. Average hourly earnings still a little light, but still, that's your paycheck. The paycheck growing 3.7% over the past year. So if you have a job, you're being compensated for it. So the headlines here are all pretty sturdy. Also, the month of May was revised higher, kind of defying expectations, but you dig in these numbers. Private sector was not what was really driving things. It was state government jobs driving this job growth. So seeing the weakest private sector job growth since last October.
Yeah, so Caleb, I think a lot of people have been waiting for things to sort of take a bad turn. When you look at DOGE, when you look at sort of the economic uncertainty surrounding the tariffs, what does this say about the state of our economy right now?
It's stronger than a lot of us thought it might be at this point in time. And as Christine said, a lot of the headline numbers look really strong here, almost surprisingly strong. We had April and May revised higher. You have the unemployment rate dropping from 4.2% to 4.1%. Less workers out there. That brings the denominator down. And when you look at the government jobs, we did lose 7,000 federal government jobs. Those are the DOGE cuts, 69,000 total so far. But other government jobs, local and state government, was probably the most aggressive hiring sector here. So there's a lot of strength and resilience in that part of the economy right now. Not a lot in private sector. We got the private payrolls earlier this week. That fell 33,000 jobs, first drop in several years.
Yeah. So again, the cope is real, okay? Because basically CNN is admitting that their doomsday predictions were wrong, right? That the economy is not collapsing, that despite the tariffs, businesses are adapting, okay? Because over time, businesses have learned how to adapt, right? That's what businesses do. Markets are dynamic, and economics is not black and white, right? I'm here to tell you, it's really not. It really is a gray area, okay? And I think the mistake that a lot of these people made when it came to the tariff situation is looking at it from a black and white perspective instead of considering all possibilities in regards to what could happen, okay? And this is why they have egg on their face, right? This is why, once again, they're wrong, okay? And they're stunned and they're shocked by these jobs reports, by these inflation numbers, by all of the pretty good economic data that we're getting. And it doesn't mean that all the data is great, because as you guys heard there and what we briefly covered yesterday, it looks like there is some weakness in the private sector, right, in regards to job growth. Now, this report basically showed that a lot of the growth happened in state and local governments, which is not necessarily a bad thing, okay? I would much rather have the state and local governments hiring, right, employing people locally, okay, than for the federal government, right? So if the federal government's losing jobs and, you have state governments, if they're picking up jobs and things like that, I think that's overall a good thing, right? That's not something to poo-poo, right? But, again, the private sector, we are seeing some weakness, okay, when it comes to hiring there. And that is something to be concerned about. And I want to talk about that and what that could possibly mean for rate cuts heading into the future. So without further ado, let's go ahead and react to this News Nation report on the jobs.
A new snapshot of the state of the economy. The latest jobs report coming in better than expected again, with nearly 150,000 jobs added. News Nation's Alicia Nieves is live for us on Wall Street with more. Alicia, what are you seeing in some of the data and the latest numbers?
Yeah, I mean, this was a good report, quite frankly, a little bit unexpected. I mean, this is the 5th consecutive jobs report since Trump's tariffs went into place that have either come in better than expected or right in line with expectations. And that's notable, really, because since Liberation Day, as the administration has called it, there has been this fear on Wall Street and Main Street, you, me, and most people at home, that the tariffs would lead to some economic uncertainty and maybe some economic downside. But so far in the data, that has not been seen. The latest data point being the jobs report that just came out a little while ago, 147,000 jobs added, when the expectation was that we would continue to see a slowdown of only 110,000 jobs added. But even more notable was the unemployment rate. That came down to 4.1% when the expectation was that it was going to tick up from 4.2 to 4.3%. As a result of this jobs report, again, coming in better than expected. If we take a look at the futures and where markets are heading, looking to open in just a few minutes, they're looking to open to the upside. They were earlier in the morning kind of hugging around the flat line, even teetering into negative territory. And so on the news of this report, we've seen this bounce in the markets. And that's really noticeable and notable, again, because investors were pricing in the potential for further slowdown. Again, only 110,000 jobs. And they were pricing that in because we did get some economic data over the last week that showed the start of potentially some worry, right? We got PCE data that showed consumer spending. That trickled down a little bit, about 0.1%. That is huge in the fact that, 70% of our economy is based on consumer spending. And then core inflation with PCE, that rose 2.7% as opposed to 2.6%, which was the expectation. Then just yesterday, we got ADP, private payroll numbers. It showed a reduction in the private sector, about 33,000 jobs, when the expectation was 100,000 jobs. I warned earlier in the morning that ADP does not always correlate to the jobs report, and certainly we saw that now. The markets have priced that out, and they didn't budge yesterday on those numbers. And again, if we look at the markets right now before I wrap this, we're looking to open to the upside. We're going to go into the 4th of July weekend with, markets hitting another potential record. S&P 500 has been in record territory the better part of this week, and it looks like it's going to potentially close when markets close early today at 1 p.m. In that territory. I expect the president going to be taking a victory lap on Truth Social, because for his end and for the administration, this is them telling, the markets in the world right now that there hasn't been this major economic impact that everyone has been worried about, 4 or 5 months into tariffs being in effect. But I will say, on the other end, it's probably not going to lead to a rate cut, which is something the president has wanted. This all but surely removes the chance that we see a rate cut at the end of the month when the FOMC meets again. Marnie?
All right. Thank you for that update, Alicia. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's the paradox here, right? Which is that if you get good data, then that means there's less likely to be a rate cut, right? But if you get bad data, then that means that it's more likely to be a rate cut, right? Which is kind of like, again, that's the issue, right? So again, when you look at the ADP report, which is just one data point, right? When you talk about a loss of 33,000 private sector jobs, that suggests that there could be some weakness, okay, in the private sector. And this is why it's so important for the big, beautiful bill to be passed, because for all the criticisms of the bill, I don't think anybody's saying that the bill is not going to cause growth, right? I'm pretty sure that the bill with supply side stimulus, the deductions, the tax incentives, the tax benefits that a lot of these businesses are going to get as a result of this piece of legislation is definitely going to drive growth, right? So that bill being passed, I think, will help shore up the private sector for sure, okay? But if the private sector is showing some weakness, then I think that could be an argument for why, despite overall good numbers, why maybe small rate cuts are justified. If they're going to cut rates, why I disagree with the president is that they shouldn't cut them so big, right? They shouldn't do 1 to 2 percentage point cuts, right? I think that's too big, and that actually could have a reverse effect in regards to what they want at the long end of the yield curve, which is to bring down rates. It could actually increase rates if investors see that as too inflationary, right? So I think that smaller cuts would probably be more appropriate, right? Maybe, I don't know, 20 basis points, 25 basis points, I think 50 basis points at most, okay? But I would be an advocate of micro cuts at this point in order to just kind of tick it down a little bit, see what happens, and go from there. But, Jerome Powell has refused to budge at all on this, and the Trump administration is continuing to try to pressure Jerome Powell into dropping rates. But again, it's going to get harder and harder, right? The more good economic news that comes out, the more he can justify holding rates steady, right? Which, again, that's kind of the paradox here. So let's get into it.
Deal with the $9 trillion that's coming due this year.
We'll just turn it over. Oh, well, let me tell you that we're going to do it this way. We're going to turn it over short term because we have a stupid person at the Fed. If he would lower the rates, but I don't want to have to pay for 10 years debt at a higher rate. And then we're going to get somebody into the Fed who's going to be able to lower the rates. We should be at 1% or 2%.
Yeah, again, I disagree with that. I don't think we should be at 1% or 2%. I think that type of rate cut would probably backfire, but I do agree that rates should be lowered just, slightly, steadily over time. Okay, I think that might be appropriate. But we probably shouldn't do huge rate cuts at one time, okay? But I understand where the president is going. President Trump is the type of guy where he will take the maximalist position in order to get something going, right? So I'm not really taking his word at face value in regards to where he thinks rates should be. I think he's probably saying that, again, because that's the way that he negotiates. He takes the maximalist position. But that certainly is a maximalist position when you talk about rates.
And that's President Trump with me in my exclusive interview last week on the $9 trillion of debt that rolls over this year. I am talking this morning with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. And Secretary, I want to get your thoughts on that in terms of this $9 trillion in debt that is coming due this year. Not to mention the debt and deficits that many lawmakers have mentioned in the big, beautiful bill. What are the plans for the $9 trillion?
Maria, we've seen a great demand from both domestic and overseas investors for U.S. debt. We will make our decision on how to term the debt out over the next couple of months. But I can tell you right now, the short-term rates, 2-year rates are telling us that the overnight rate is too high, and we're gonna take that into account. But our debt management process is very regular, very methodical. But we are going to take these contingencies into account.
And I know that you have watched the 10-year. It has broken below 4.3%, now sitting at 4.26%. And, of course, we are awfully close to the date that the government runs out of money, Mr. Secretary. And, of course, in the big, beautiful bill is that point to raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. Secretary, when is the X date? Is it August of this year?
Well, Maria, at 7:45, we won't have to worry about the X date anymore. This should get us well into 2027, and we'll go from there. But I can tell you that I had lots of meetings with the Freedom Caucus and lots of the Senate so-called deficit hawks too. And look, Maria, I'm a deficit hawk. President Trump's a deficit hawk. We are going to fix this fiscal problem and get it under control. That should bring down interest rates. That signal. But these Freedom Caucus members, they've shifted the center of gravity and the conversation, just like the deficit hawks in the Senate have, just as President Trump has. So we are laser focused on bringing this deficit down.
Yeah,
at this point, they're going to have to try to outgrow it, right? That's going to be the strategy, because they're certainly not cutting it enough in the bill. The strategy is going to be to try to outgrow it because, again, if you cut too much, as we talked about yesterday, people, they don't like when the government programs get taken away, right? And that's not good for elections. I wish it wasn't like that, but that's just the way that, our current democratic system works, right? And that's just kind of what it is. But basically, to translate what he's really saying, okay, is that the plan is to outgrow it. The plan is that hopefully this bill generates enough growth that it's at least neutral, right, when it comes to the deficit. But again, we'll see.
And I know that the president has been prodding Jay Powell to cut interest rates. Do you believe that if he cuts rates on the short end, then long-term rates would also get impacted by that?
I think that inflation expectations should be coming down. Inflation expectations are very well anchored. The dog that didn't bark was inflation due to tariffs. I call it tariff derangement syndrome. And the Federal Reserve, it's a committee. The committee seems to be a little off here in their judgment. And I think that, as we see inflation coming down, just based on previous Fed models, that rates will be lower.
Now, Mr. Secretary, this morning, Bill Pulte from the FHFA is demanding that Jay Powell resign immediately because of this $2.5 billion project on a new Fed headquarters. Do you want to see Jay Powell resign?
Look, I think that we have been trying to get waste, fraud, and abuse out of the system. So that is it healthy for the Fed to get their spending under control just like everybody else in this time of belt tightening and right sizing the federal government? Sure.
So you want to see him resign?
I want to see the Fed right size their budget.
I see. I mean, look, Secretary, you've got an incredible job, the leading person in terms of the economy in the world, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and yet your name was on a list, apparently, for the president considering you to run the Federal Reserve. Is that a job you would like?
We have a lot of great candidates for the Federal Reserve. I think I have the best job in Washington. I get to interact with the president. The cabinet that he's chosen is fantastic, and being part of that cabinet is the dream of a lifetime for me. But I will go where the president thinks that I am best suited.
Yeah. Wow. Scott Bessent is really a team player, right? That's one thing I like about him the most is that you can tell like he's a man that's like just down for the team, right? He's not really about himself. He's always about making sure that the president's agenda gets accomplished. And, you just kind of respect it, right? I just kind of respect the way that he moves, right? As a professional. Okay. He is really a great example of what it means to be a professional. And, that's what we have, right? We have decent overall numbers. It's not doom and gloom. The mainstream liberal media is once again coping with the fact that the economy hasn't collapsed, right? It's almost as if they want to see the economy collapse, but it hasn't happened yet. But yet there is work to be done, right? And this is why I say it's important that the big, beautiful bill gets passed, because that will be their stimulus. That will be their supply side stimulus for the private sector. And I think that will probably help shore up some of the job numbers that we're seeing in the private sector. Who knows? Maybe the feds will fold or interest rate cuts. But, I think bare minimum, we're probably going to see it happen next year, right? Which, is not ideal for what this administration wants. But, hey, I think eventually they're going to get what they want. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.